Yashodanandana Vajjanarandana Yamunatira Vanachari Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pavrajagacharya Sutra Sata His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Shri Mad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Giridhari Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi All Goys Samudhoris Hare Krishna All Goys Samudhoris Hare Krishna All Goys Samudhoris Hare Krishna All Goys Shri Shri Guru Garanga All Goys Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhaturi Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Chamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Shri Srinivadi Vasvishtai. Good morning, dear devotees. This morning was very turbulent on the highway getting here. Quite rainy, hard to see. So worth it. Let me just check. We'll read from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, just a page, and then, oh really? Well, I have a note anyway, so I'll just check that. For 561, making our way through. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where they left off on this page. I'll just start at the next paragraph, which seems to be like another section. The next morning, the temple was crowded with young people who had seen Swamiji at the Avalon. Most of them had stayed up all night. Srila Prabhupada, having followed his usual morning schedule, came down at 7, held kirtana, and delivered the morning lecture. Later that morning, while riding to the beach with Kirtanananda and Hayagriva, Swamiji asked how many people had attended last night's kirtan. When they told him, he asked how much money they had made, and they said they weren't sure, but it was approximately $1,500. Half audibly, he chanted in the back seat of the car, looking out the window as quiet and unassuming as a child, with no indication that the night before he had been cheered and applauded by thousands of hippies who had stood back and made a grand aisle for him to walk in triumph across the strobe-lit floor amid the thunder of the electric basses and pounding drums of the Avalon Ballroom. For all the fanfare of the night before, he remained untouched, the same as ever in personal demeanor. He was aloof, innocent, and humble, while at the same time appearing very grave and ancient. As Kirtanananda and Hayagriva were aware, Swamiji was not of this world. They knew that he, unlike them, was always thinking of Krishna. They walked with him along the boardwalk, near the ocean, with its cool breezes and cresting waves. Kirtanananda spread the chadara over Prabhupada's shoulders. In Bengali, there is one nice verse, Prabhupada remarked, breaking his silence. I remember, oh, what is that voice across the sea calling, calling, come here, come here. Speaking little, he walked the boardwalk with his two friends, frequently looking out at the sea and sky. As he walked, he softly sang a mantra that Kirtananda and Hayagriva had never heard before. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radharamana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. He sang softly in a deep voice as they walked along the boardwalk. He looked out at the Pacific Ocean. Because it is great, it is tranquil. The ocean seems to be eternal, Hayagriva ventured. No, Prabhupada replied. Nothing in the material world is eternal. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, fourth canto, chapter 29, text 4. This chapter is entitled Talks Between Narada Muni and King Prachinavari. Before I start, I'll just quickly open my laptop so it's ready for y'all. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yada jikrikshan purusha kartneya pakrite gunan navadvaram dvi hastangri tatramanukta sadviti yada jikrikshan purusha kartneya pakrite gunan navadvaram dvi hastangri tatramanukta sadviti yada jikrikshan purusha hartsnena pakrite gunan navadvaram dvihastangri tatra manuta sadviti. Vaishnavas? Yada jikrikshan purusha hartsena pakrite gunan navadvaram dvihastangri tatra manuta sadviti. Yada jikrikshan purusha rakshena prakriti gunan navadvaram dvihastangri vajramanuta sadviti. Yada jikrikshan purusha hartsena prakriti gunan navadvaram dvihastangri Word for word, yada, when. Dikrikshan, desiring to enjoy. Purusha, the living entity. Parkshena, in total. Pakriti, of material nature. Gunan, the modes. Navadvaram, having 9 gates. Dvi, 2. Hasta, hands. Angri, legs. Tatra, there. Amanuta, he thought. Sadhu, very good. Iti, thus. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands, and 2 legs. Thus he prefers to become a human being or a demigod. Purport. This is a very nice explanation of how the spiritual being, the part and parcel of Krishna, God, accepts a material body by virtue of his own desires. Accepting 2 hands, 2 legs, and so on, the living entity fully enjoys the modes of material nature. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7.27, Ichadvishta samuddhena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani samoham sargayanti parantapa. O Sayana Bharata, Arjuna, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. Originally, the living entity is a spiritual being, but when he actually desires to enjoy this material world, he comes down. From this verse, we can understand that the living entity first accepts a body that is human in form, but gradually, due to his degraded activities, he falls into lower forms of life, into the animal, plant, and aquatic forms. By the gradual process of evolution, the living entity again attains the body of a human being and is given another chance to get out of the process of transmigration. If he again misses his chance in the human form to understand his position, he is again placed in the cycle of birth and death in various types of bodies. The desire of the living entity to come into the material world is not very difficult to understand. Although one may be born in a family of Aryans, where there are restrictions against meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex, one may still want to enjoy these forbidden things. There is always someone who wants to go to a prostitute for illicit sex, or to a hotel to eat meat and drink wine. There's always someone who wants to gamble at nightclubs or enjoy so-called sports. All these propensities are already within the hearts of the living entities, but some living entities stop to enjoy these abominable activities and consequently fall down to a degraded platform. The more one desires a degraded life within his heart, the more he falls down to occupy different forms of abominable existence. This is the process of transmigration and evolution. A particular type of animal may have a strong tendency to enjoy one kind of sense enjoyment. But in the human form, one can enjoy all the senses. The human form has the faculty to utilize all the senses for gratification. Unless one is properly trained, he becomes a victim of the modes of material nature, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 3.27. Pakriti kriyamanani guna karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. Bewildered soul, under the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. As soon as one desires to enjoy his senses, he puts himself under the control of material energy and automatically or mechanically is placed into the cycle of birth and death in various forms of life. Om Angyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for sticking around and allowing me to speak on this text of the Bhagavatam. I pray for your blessings that I may do some service and maybe even try to have my own realizations as well. Hopefully it also sinks into my brain. I think we'll just start firstly with a few things from this verse, and we can talk about the chapter as a whole as well. So I'll read the text one more time. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands and 2 legs, and thus he prefers to become a human being or demigod. So the points that stick out in this verse are that the living entity, we often want to think of ourselves as very individual, and we all have, our different lives and propensities and personalities, but it's amazing how in the Bhagavatam, it can say the living entity, and it's talking about all of us. So it's covering, man, woman, child, and every species. And it's talking about the soul. So the soul, when the soul wants to enjoy material nature, what that means is that we want to enjoy the modes of material nature. And as devotees, I think it can be a little bit hard to understand because after being educated through the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and having devotee association, having gotten mercy, maybe transforming our lives, eating prasadam, it's actually quite hard to understand why you'd want to enjoy lower modes and how you could even consider it enjoyment after having education. But in this purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that somebody might be in a family of Aryans, which are very highly elevated. And actually, as a devotee, and I'm sure you all would humbly admit, we may be trying and striving to be devotees, but we may not be actually Aryans in the sense of the full sense of the term, because they're so exalted. To consider yourself an Aryan would be like a perfect human being, and also one who's been born in a lineage of perfect human beings, which I don't think. I mean, you maybe, but I am not. So when you consider that Srila Prabhupada is giving the highest class of human beings, Aryans, as the example, where someone may be born in even that high class exalted position, but within the heart, they may still have a desire, if they're exposed to forms of enjoyment in ignorance or in passion, then it might still be a little bit attractive to the heart of a conditioned soul, even in such an exalted position as an Aryan in the Aryan race. So if such beings can be attracted, then it's pretty much covering all of us, essentially, is that within the heart, we are subtly attracted, even if we are practicing devotees and have a desire to be elevated, and we're trying to live a lifestyle which is sattvic, or striving for a sattvic lifestyle. But every once in a while, at night, you might just open up Netflix, or just try to get into a different mode of nature in some way or another, even on a subtle level. So in that way, we can try to understand what this verse is describing, that there's a desire to enjoy lower modes of nature. And even if they aren't as gross as breaking 4 regulative principles, there's different ways that it can occur, in more subtle ways. It's just the enjoyer of the material things. So subsequently, when somebody has such desires, an elevated person will acknowledge, because the mind is more clear as you become more elevated. So when somebody acknowledges, oh, that desire is there, through intelligence, they may not act on it. But in this purport, Srila Prabhupada is describing that there's always somebody who wants to enjoy these things, and some living entities stop to enjoy them. Whereas others, we may want to enjoy in that way, but the intelligence is sharp enough to say, that's not good for me, and I'm going to go in a different direction. But then there are others who do not stop, who do not take that good intelligence and they stop to enjoy. And through that enjoyment, they're entangled and bound up in the reactionary karmic progression, which ensues, and they become more and more degraded. And it's it's interesting because when we read the Bhagavatam, in this section, for instance, Srila Prabhupada describes that degradation lifetime after lifetime. But even in one lifetime, I know for myself that if I even on a minute level try to enjoy materially, I'll start seeing degradation even now. So we don't have to zoom out so far to have a realistic understanding of how this is applicable right now. For instance, we don't need to wait to our next life to understand where our destination can be, because right now, however we are living, there'll be symptoms of what modes we're associating with. There'll be reactions to past activities to greater or lesser degrees, and we'll be more or less, because we're in the material world, enjoying or suffering our past life karma and present karma, unless you're completely transcendental. And even I've heard that for someone who's completely transcendental, that acharyas will compare it to the turning of a fan, and how their karmic reactions start winding down and out, but they're still exposed to them on some level. So those are some of the points that I picked up from this verse. And now I'd like to just speak a little bit more about the whole chapter, where we are and who's speaking. So the talks between Narada and King Prachinabhari, this is winding up a section of the Bhagavatam, which was about King Puranjana. So the last two chapters have been about the allegory of King Puranjana. And so that was the first chapter, the first part of this section. And then the second part of the chapter, or the section of the Bhagavatam, was about how King Puranjana passed away, took birth as a woman, and then so he took birth as a woman because he was attached to his queen. Then in that female body became attached to her husband, and then died and became a man. So it just was a kind of case study of what happens when you're attached and you quit your body thinking of a particular person or object. And we can see from that section of Bhagavatam the implications of attachment. And now in this part of the section with Narada Muni and King Prachinabhari, Narada Muni is more explicitly telling King Prachinabhari that this allegory was about you. And what's really interesting, we're just at the beginning of this chapter, but the beginning of the chapter starts with King Prachinabhari saying, I don't actually understand your allegory. And I thought that was actually pretty humble and bold at the same time, because Narada Muni had been speaking for quite a long time. If you've read this section of the Bhagavatam, this allegory of King Puranjana is quite lengthy and detailed. So it kind of reminds me of that part of the Chaitanya Leela where Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is explaining the Vedanta Sutras to Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Chaitanya is just sitting there for a really long time, I think 7 days, and didn't say anything. And then when he finally asked him, like, are you understanding anything I'm saying? He says, well, I understand the sutras, but I can't understand what you're talking about, because the sutras are like the sun in the sky, but your purports on them are like clouds. This is like the opposite. It's almost like the person who's speaking is as clear as the sun, but because King Prachinabhari is clouded in his intelligence, he can't understand. So it's a similar example, but in the one example with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he was cloudy in his intelligence and trying to instruct. And so the perfect student, Lord Chaitanya, could not understand. In this example, the teacher is as clear as day, but the student is cloudy. So my feet are falling asleep. Sorry. I actually can't feel the metal. Oh, Krishna. That's really uncomfortable. So Narada Muni, he's such a patient teacher. And in this chapter of the Bhagavatam, he starts by saying, in this text, well, let's talk about the fall of the living entity, which is essentially what happened to King Pranjana. Again, he's going back and sort of rephrasing again. And then he explains the meaning of different analogies within the story of King Pranjana. So for instance, there was the serpent, which represented the life force, and there was a different gate to the body, and they all represent different things. He goes through them quite in a very detailed way. Which means that he kind of has to give the story almost all over again. But the main thing that I took away from this chapter was that when it comes to the end of him kind of re-explaining the different analogies that he's made and helping King Prachinabhari to understand the details of what he just said in the allegory. When he comes to summarize the allegory, he actually just directly gives the lessons that you should learn from it, which is really useful. So I'd like to just focus on those lessons. And I'm only going to choose one of the lessons because we could probably speak all day on the lessons Narada Muni is giving. So I thought to just focus on one of them in particular. And even just speaking about that one topic, it can go out into so many subtopics and branches that I won't really ever do it justice. So I'm just preparing you. This is a high-level overview. Okay, my legs are a little bit back to normal now. Okay, so I'll read you the verse. It's a frequently recited verse, and it's the one that I'd like to speak on today, because I think it's the root, and then if we can understand this one thing, other parts of it will help, will be easier to understand. So Yata hi purusho param shirasa gurum udvaham ham sandhena sat atate tata sarva pakriti kriya. So this is text 29 of this chapter, or sorry, 33 of this chapter. The English translation is, a man may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the burden from one place to another. So in the allegory of King Pranjana, one thing that was very clear is that King Pranjana was often performing sacrifices. and he was performing different kinds of duties in his life to counteract the stresses and to make his future bright, if you will. And that was the main lesson that Narada Muni wanted to point out to King Prachinabhari, because King Prachinabharishat, he was performing hundreds of sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and often they were not actually even done properly. And Narada Muni was concerned, you're thinking you're actually doing yourself a favor, and you're doing yourself an injustice, and at the same time, you're not solving any of your problems. So in this verse, it really nicely summarizes what that mentality is like. It's, I've got something on my head, now my head feels heavy, now I'll put it on my shoulder. Now my shoulder feels heavy, can now carry it in the opposite arm. Now my arm, okay. So basically what we're talking about when we get to the essence of what that means is this world is problematic. This world is a burden. Existence is burdensome. When we are trying to counteract the issues we run into, the problems we have in this world with material solutions, we're just transferring the burden around because it's unavoidable. We have to be burdened if we're going to be living a temporary existence, because we're eternal souls. The eternal living entity can't go into an atmosphere which is temporary and be happy. And we're going to feel burdened in that atmosphere. By trying to make that atmosphere anything than what it is, we're delusional, and we're cheating ourselves by trying to figure out different processes to be happy in that atmosphere, rather than just come to the conclusion. And I was speaking with my husband and Shamanga last night. We were talking about this topic. They're helping me to put my class together. Thank you. And and we were talking about, like, why don't people just get it? Like, why is it so hard for the living entity to come to this conclusion? And Narada Muni, he actually gives the answer to that as well in this section of the Bhagavatam. He explains that it's education. You don't know what you don't know. And if we're not trained, which is what Srila Prabhupada is saying, the human being has the facility to enjoy all the senses. Unless one is properly trained, he becomes a victim. And it's really sad. And it's so good that you're here, Somi Mai. And I can say thank you for going on the street every day, because you are training people. You're giving out books and you're distributing this knowledge. Because if they're not trained, if we don't know, if we never read, we will be victimized. And it's actually very, very sad. When we consider that the majority of people in this world don't know this basic truth. It's heartbreaking, actually. And it makes minor things the big thing for them. For instance, I give you a personal example. So my husband was playing soccer and he hurt his knee. But he's a devotee, so he's never complained about this knee injury, which is really interesting. Like, I've lived with people who have gotten injured, and if they're non-devotees, that's all they pretty much talk about all day long. Like, knee really hurts, can't do anything. It becomes a big complaint, and like absorbs them, and sometimes even can become depressed and lose so much motivation to do anything, even their own duties, and the relationships suffer. But for a devotee, okay, he hurt his knee, but he knows he's not his knee. He knows he's not his body. So, and he knows the body is temporary and faulty. So it's not a surprise, right? No one's surprised. Like, I got sick last week. It wasn't a shocker. I'm waiting for these things to happen. Like, mentally, the devotee prepares themselves for the consequences of being in the material energy, in the material nature. We prepare. And then when it comes, not a shock. And when we're experiencing it, it's an opportunity to take shelter or be more humble, to have more realization. This isn't my body. Like, my body is different from me. It's not perfect. You know, hopefully you have a knee injury and you're limping around. You feel like, yeah, this is motivation to get out of this world. Like the body, his body is not even 40 years old, and he's limping. For the eternal soul, how embarrassing! You're eternal, and your body is perfect, and it's fully functional eternally. The spiritual body. So how embarrassing for the soul to be in a body that can't even last 40 years without having some sort of malfunction. It's horrible. So the devotee has these realizations, and it's actually progressive. It's not depressing, but it's so, for me, I feel so sad when I read this, that that this is the only difference, really. Like, we've been so blessed as devotees that we've gotten this education, and I feel so sad when to see how many people don't have it, and it's even sadder when you offer it to them and they reject it. It's a really tragic thing. So that's the point about counteraction. Now, of course, I can't leave you on that depressing note. So we'll go higher. The next part of this chapter, I would just like to mention there's a verse about this in the Bhagavatam as well, about this inability for the spirit soul trapped in the material body to avoid these things. It's from Canto 5, chapter 14, text 25. And the translation of the Sanskrit is, being unable to protect himself from the threefold miseries of material existence, the conditioned soul becomes very morose and lives a life of lamentation. These threefold miseries are miseries suffered by mental calamity at the hands of demigods, such as freezing wind and scorching heat, miseries offered by other living entities, and miseries arising from the body and mind themselves. In the purport, it's quite short. It says, Srila Prabhupada says, the so-called happy materialistic person is constantly having to endure the threefold miseries of life called Adi Devika, Adi Atmika, and Adi Bodhika. Actually, no one can counteract these threefold miseries. All three may assail one at one time, or one misery may be present and the other absent and the other present. Thus, the living entity is full of anxiety, fearing misery from one side or another. The conditioned soul must be disturbed by at least one of these three miseries. There's no escape. It's so interesting, like we're actually being bombarded by these three different miseries. And then trying to counteract them materially is just that passing of the burden. And it's really interesting. I'm trying to think about, ways that I might be doing this in my own life. I guess, it's not to say that we can't be, if you're sick, you can't go to the doctor, that it's just, I think on the highest level, that when you have that education, that you don't expect the doctor to solve the problems of your life. And you don't take that one small problem to be the biggest problem. So for instance, the knee injury, he might be suffering that right now. But just because he's suffering this minor injury doesn't mean that's his main problem. Main problem is you're in the material world. That's what we can't forget. And when we try to, I'm gonna fix my knee, and then my car breaks down because of the weather. And then, someone's arguing with me at work. So it's just one thing or another. You're gonna be disturbed, like, that's the essence. So obviously, you're all aware of a solution, but I will say it anyway. So in this chapter, the Narada Muni, he explained that it's actually very beautiful. I want to actually read you this one part. He says that those who are less intelligent accept Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all. They do not know the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusion in search after other homes. And I think this is related because, again, we can sometimes, when we have narrow intelligence and not broad-mindedness, we can accept a small problem as our problem in life. But if we understand with broad intelligence the real problems of life, then we can know I'm not at home. And then where is home? It's with Krishna. And we don't have to be searching after another place. We can know the place that we want to draw our attention to and fix our minds on and try to elevate ourselves to return to home. And so Narada Muni, he explains that without education, it's very difficult to, first of all, come to the conclusion of what our real problem of life is. But the most important part of that education is to know how to go home, right? There's two parts to that education. It's you're in trouble. Okay, I'm understanding that. And then here's the solution. And the solution, Narada Muni, he explains that it's very difficult to actually understand Krishna. He says in this chapter, the most powerful Lord Brahma, the father of all progenitors, including all the sages he mentions a long list, Kartu, Brigu, Vashishta, my humble self, Narada, are all stalwart brahmanas who can speak authoritatively on Vedic literature. So we are very powerful because of austerities, meditation, and education. Nonetheless, even after inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom we always see, we do not know him perfectly. So we have to understand that we have a problem. We have to understand what the solution to the problem is. We have to be humble enough to understand and know that even if we know who to approach, who's Krishna, that there will always be parts of Krishna that we'll almost never understand because he's inconceivable. And he's so that his being and consciousness and personality, qualities, activities are so unfathomable that even as somebody who's trying to approach or worship him will only really ever understand as a drop, but that drop is enough to inundate us into like complete ecstasy. So it's a combination of knowing and being so happy to have this process, but also very humbling at the same time. Because if we really are trying to understand Krishna, we'll also understand to some degree that we'll never understand him. And Narada Muni, he says, my dear king, in the place where pure devotees live, following the rules and regulations, and thus purely conscious, and engaged with great eagerness in hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in that place, one gets a chance to hear the constant flow of nectar, which is exactly like the waves of a river. One will forget the necessities of life, namely hunger and thirst, and become immune to all kinds of fear, lamentation, and delusion. So it's pretty incredible. We just have to hear about Krishna and chant his glories and associate with one another and allow it to enter our heart. And when it enters the heart, it'll eradicate that fear and lamentation and the illusion that we have of trying to accept this place as a home. And our intelligence will start to clear and become purified, and our senses will start to engage in the process of devotion so that we're able to be in this world but not of this world. And even the abodes where devotees are able to live together, those places are not of this world. This temple is not of this world. Srila Prabhupada described this temple as almost like an embassy, a place where you can come and almost when you enter, like an embassy, for instance, it almost has like border security. So if I'm in New Zealand but I enter the Canadian embassy, it's as good as being in Canada. if I'm in India and I go into the Canadian embassy, it's as good as being in Canada. So although Canada is very far from India and New Zealand, I enter this embassy and I'm there. So when I come to this temple, it's similar. I'm in New Zealand when I'm outside. I come inside of here and I'm in Vaikuntha. And these are embassies of the spiritual world where you can hear, you can take shelter, you can see the Lord. And, I'm not elevated. I can't see Krishna in my mind and my heart. But he's so merciful, he's here in his embassy. And he has embassies everywhere, all around. And he's waiting for us. Come and visit. Hear about me. Talk about me. See me. It's amazing in the story of King Puranjana, in that second part of the allegory where King Puranjana becomes a woman, and then takes birth again as a man. In that next birth as a man, he's instructed by an unknown friend. And that unknown friend, Narada Muni explains in this chapter, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he's unknown because he cannot be perceived by material names, material qualities, material senses. So although he's a friend of every living entity, he's unknown to every living entity, practically speaking. But if we can try to come into his embassy and see him and hear about him and know him, learn about him, we can get the friendship of the most powerful person in the entire creation. And I don't know, like even as a devotee, I don't know if I'm really utilizing that to its full extent. I think we could all do more to take more shelter of Krishna as our friend. And on this point, I think this is how I'll wrap up, and then we can have a few questions or discussion. We were talking about how even great sages or even Lord Brahma, they admit, they're the most intelligent, saintly people in the whole universe. And yet they're admitting, as much as we worship and see Krishna, we don't know him perfectly. And this is really revealed. I just wanted to speak more about some of the Leela. This is really revealed in Lord Brahma's Vimohana Leela. He comes to Vrindavan, he sees Krishna playing with his friends, and question, he doubts, and then he tests. And when he tests the potency of Krishna in his tiny cowherd boy body, he comes to understand that he cannot fathom the potency of Krishna's body. And he tries to bewilder Krishna, and he becomes so bewildered by Krishna's response that it's almost as if Srila Prabhupada gives a description in Krishna book about the kind of impact. So Lord Brahma is really powerful, and he compares it to an atomic bomb. And in this world, we're terrified of nuclear weapons, right? We're terrified of them. So you can see what can happen to a city if a nuclear bomb is dropped. Then he says, what is the purpose, or what is the power or significance of a nuclear bomb if it's dropped on the face of the sun? Nothing. It'll be no different. It's like a blip. That's what happened. That's how Lord Brahma felt in this pastime. He's like, I'm dropping a nuclear bomb. And Krishna's like, nah. It like didn't faze him at all. He continued playing. He manifested more friends and had lunch. And then this all happened for like a whole year. And then Lord Brahma's like, what? And it was almost as if there was no reaction to him trying to mess with something, with Krishna. Like, it actually proves you can't mess with Krishna, like so perfectly. It's so special. And I think I'd like to end on that note, because in this chapter, Srila Narada Muni is explaining Krishna as the unknown friend. And if he can have someone come into his pastime and disrupt it to the degree that Lord Brahma disrupted it. And have practically, like, you know, he did things to recover from the situation, but it was easy for him, and it seemed like nothing happened to everybody else. Like Krishna knew what happened, and he made arrangements for it to appear as if nothing happened. But everybody else had no idea, including Balaram, that that's happened. So if he can adjust things so perfectly in his own Leela, you can imagine that, okay, we've had so many past lives, births, deaths, everything, all the karmic reactions. So those karmic reactions are the atomic bomb on the sun when you have Krishna as your friend. He can level it. He's a supreme being. So I think I'll just like to remind you all who we're dealing with here and what kind of power he has. He can counteract anything you've ever done and make it seem like it's never happened because he's your friend. And he can make your life perfect. And he can even make this material world, Srila Prabhupada, he explains, I want to find the exact purport, but we're running short on time. So he explains that Krishna is so powerful that it doesn't matter what's happened in the past, and it doesn't matter even how bad the current situation is in the material world. He can make your life pleasant, even if you're just here. So it's pretty incredible. And you can start, like, for me, I can, with this knowledge, it gives me some realization or some understanding that when a pure devotee says heaven or hell, like as long as I'm serving Krishna, like, I'm happy. Because with that understanding, you can understand why you can be anywhere. Because Krishna can counteract anywhere that you are and make it fine. And like Somyamai, I'm sure you've had so many experiences. You're in this like weird place on the street in a parking lot. It's raining, but you're so blissed out because you have Krishna as your friend and you're serving. So it takes literally hell and turns it into like a beautiful experience that's pleasant and blissful. And when you're talking to somebody, it's pouring rain, you're freezing and they're freezing. They're wondering like, what drug are you on? Like, what planet are you from? Like, why are you not miserable right now? Like, look around. But for you, you're in a completely different atmosphere, mentally, emotionally. Like, bhakti yoga is so special. I'll stop there, and if you like, you can add any realizations or questions or feedback that you like to give me. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. Hare Krishna. Yes, Sonia. Thank you. Yeah. Mm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, in this chapter, I think it's related. What I'm about to say, I think it's related. In this chapter, Srila Narada Muni, he goes to a great length to kind of re-explain this whole thing and give more precise lessons about his whole allegory of King Pranjana. Due to King Prachinabhari, his lack of understanding or appreciation of what's being said. And when I thought about how King Prachinabhari was telling Narada Muni, I don't understand, that there was a few layers to that, because when you think, he was saying, I don't understand because I'm too attached, fruitive activities. And, King Krishna, he is probably, thousands of times more advanced than people we're speaking to on the streets, right? So he's kind of giving us the answer. Like he's saying, because I'm attached to material fruitive activities, I can't understand what you're saying. And so if you think about somebody who's saying to you, you're like, hey, you're suffering and here's a solution. When they're saying to you, I don't understand, what they're actually saying is I'm too attached. And I think in my own life, I can relate. So for instance, say I've been, try to give you an example. So I work in a government service, and it's when you're working in that environment, I feel it's hard not to become competitive in terms of material advancement. Like I'm actually quite happy and satisfied with the position I have now, and I could probably just do this position for the rest of my life, and it'd be fine. Like in terms of it's supporting my bhakti, it's enough, and I'm fine. But because the environment is very competitive, and the materialistic people I deal with are always sort of, I guess, rubbing you the wrong way, or like challenging your satisfaction, making you feel like you're weird if you're not trying to advance, or there's something like maybe you're not very motivated or ambitious or something, like there's something wrong with you. So it can, if I'm not very strong, so that can affect me, and it can make me kind of fuzzy mentally and emotionally and intellectually. It can kind of be a jarring experience, like make me feel kind of back and forth, like I don't know, should I trying to like I don't know professionally develop, and that can sometimes I can feel it's that conflict with my body. And if somebody were just to come up to me and just directly say, stop trying to materially advance at work, just focus on your bhakti. I think at first I would be like, what are you trying to say? Like, I don't really understand. I might say I don't understand, but what I'm really saying is, oh, like I've actually done a lot of things. Maybe I've done a course, or maybe I've been applying for jobs to do something because I have a desire that I'm trying to fulfill. And by just taking the direct instruction, it means like just being like kind of like cutting it and saying like I'm stopping that activity. But if you've been doing that activity for a long time, and you have like kind of been building it up and the desire is strong, sometimes someone just saying like, you don't need that. It's, I think the initial reaction is to act dumb. Like, oh, I don't really understand what you're saying. But you do understand, but you're just attached. And because you're attached, you can't apply it. And it's hard to appreciate. Sometimes people get into arguments if they're given advice that is true, but very difficult to follow. They become defensive and maybe run away. It doesn't make it not true. It just means they're attached. So yeah, of course, as devotees advance, they become more and more expert, like Narada Muni. Like, wow, how long he's taken on King Krishna, like how detailed and thorough, and he's even went back and explained it again. And he's never said like you're wasting my time. Maybe this isn't for you. Who cares? Okay, do your own thing. Like he actually kept going, like until the king understood. So, I mean, it requires quite a lot of patience on behalf of the teacher and the preacher. And it's not unusual for someone to not understand, but I would say, it's a step up if someone could admit that they're attached. Because then there's a possibility that you can try to educate them on what that attachment is doing to them and how it might be affecting them now and in the future. So What do I think about that? What do you think? Is that helpful? So many instructions on this. Yeah. And that's the truth. Yeah. It's amazing that you made that connection even for devotees because it's absolutely true. Like even though, we've been okay, I'm going to accept this as the truth. How deeply I apply it, then that's when you start seeing the different stages of advancement, the different levels and depths and purity of different devotees. That's when we start seeing it in actuality, right? Like the potency. I was right before I came today. I was thinking about a Bhagavatam class that I sat in. It was a long time ago. I would say probably in 2014 or 13. It was such a memorable experience because the devotee, he was a Prabhupada disciple. His name was Sankarsana Das Adhikari. And he came to Bhakti Lounge in Toronto. And when he came in, he started singing Jaya Radha Madhava. And then his eyes were closed. And he just said, Krishna's right here. And because he was so potent. And he can feel Krishna. Like he's such a pure devotee. He's carrying Krishna, like we say, Bhakti Tirtha. He carries Krishna in his heart. So when he said Krishna's right here, like everyone in the room started crying because we could all feel Krishna right there. That's the power of the pure devotee. Such an incredible thing. I really pray that one day I can have that kind of potency to tell somebody Krishna's right there and for them to just feel Krishna right there. That would be so amazing. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
False ego is very strong. That's why the understanding is not there.
Yeah, that's so true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite, I feel pressure more than anything.
Robert said, poor man suffers for the but if he wants to become rich, struggles. Actually, wow, that's not positioning, so he can stay.
Okay. Thank you, Krishna. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I did pray to Krishna because someone called me to do this job. And I prayed before I had this conversation to our deities at home for Unified. And I was saying to them, oh, it's so hard, like if you just dangle a little bit of money, it can be so hard to just be like, no, it's okay, thank you. So I just told them, you can see past, present, and future, and I can. And these are the things that are important to me, and these are the things that are not. So, I'm trying to accept what comes of its own accord. That's one of the instructions, nectar of instruction. I should have wrote what Swami says that one can accept things that come of their own accord. And I said, this is coming. I would say I kind of endeavored for it though. So like let it pass if it's actually going to disrupt my spiritual life. And it passed. It didn't work out. And I actually felt relieved. And I'm going to take this as an opportunity to say I'm not going to apply for any more bigger jobs. So I'm finished. Did you have anything to add? Shila Prabhupada ki jai. Haribol.